What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Merricks Garage. Today we're taking a look at Lieutenant Dan, which is the project name for this 77 K5 that was not in a fire despite how it looks. Lieutenant Dan came here in rough shape. There's a whole story as to how this got here that we're going to get into in a bit. But let me just give you the details on this build because it's going to be pretty rad. It's got 1-ton axles under it already, Dana 60, Dana 70. It's got a big block in it that's got EFI. It's got hydraulic assist. It's got a Magnum box. It's got 4 links, but none of it works. None of that stuff is installed properly or finished at this point. But it's gonna be, and that's what we're embarking on. For the past 6 months, we've been banging away at this, getting the links in, actually getting a lot of the old stuff cut off the frame, so we had a fresh, clean slate to work with, and we've made some good progress. And this week, Lieutenant Dan rolled out at the shop on his brand new legs, which was a really big moment for us. So let's jump into this week's video. I'll give you the story of Lieutenant Dan and we'll walk around and show you exactly what has been accomplished. Because this thing is pretty rad. Let's go get it. Merrick's Garage. Lieutenant Dan, you ain't got no legs! Yeah, that is a 77 Blazer that my buddy Brian is dropping off because he's thrown in the towel. Actually, he's having multiple kids and he doesn't have time. So I'm basically saving his marriage by building this truck for him. So this is 77 with a big block. We're putting a Magnum 205 link in it and fixing a whole bunch of other stuff. Hydraulic assist, he's getting the works. But I pulled this down here from his house yesterday. And holy cow, was this a cluster.
It's a hovercraft.
It's something. It's a hot mess right now. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens when we lower it off here. But let's put the camera up here so you guys can...
Hey, we're lowering it off right now.
What? It's falling? Hold on. Right, for real.
Literally, I'm holding on. Look,
Jeez.
I didn't take that strap off on purpose.
This is a disaster of epic proportions. When I picked it up, he'd already pulled the axles out of this thing. It was sitting at the end of his driveway. We really had no way of moving it. The extraction of this truck from his shop, from his house down to my shop was, it was just comedy of errors. How we didn't die or lose an arm, I don't know. This is super dumb.
But it's no different than the thing being, than the ramp being something. Oh, there she goes. Oh. Oh. Yeah. Good thing we still had that jack under there.
Are you dead?
That one's dead.
Well, that was a rusty knife fight. I highly recommend having 2 axles before you try and move a vehicle. It just makes it a lot easier. You can chalk that up or put that under information everybody knows already. But that's how it got the name Lieutenant Dan, because when it got here, it ain't got no legs. Well, Lieutenant Dan now has legs. We rolled it into the shop. We undid a bunch of the fab work that he'd done that wasn't quite right, and stripped the frame down to bare, and welded all the brackets on, welded up the rear axles, and we've got it back on its 2 legs. And I'm stoked to be working on this truck now. There's a lot left to do. It didn't catch fire, despite what it looks like. It actually did not catch fire. It was painted like this. It had a beautiful patina, and Brian decided that, you know, he wanted it to be all one color. So he got some bed liner and an old broom, and it looks like he just wiped it on with cardboard and a broom. Not the best job I've ever seen, but it kind of goes along with what he wants this build to be. This is not going to be a trailer queen. This is not going to be a show truck. This is going to be a screw you, I'm going to go bounce off some big rocks with my military tires build. And it's kind of shaping up to be that way. So let's go take a look at it. Let's go take a look at the four links, the big block, how it differs from my truck, some of the things that I've been really stoked on with this thing, and what the plans are in the future, because we got some big goals up ahead of us. I hope you guys are enjoying this video. I've got tons more to keep up to date on all my stuff. Click the subscribe button down below. So the rear axle is in. I apologize, you guys. My intention was to do a lot more video on this, and I've heard you guys, you want to see more of what we're doing. And yeah, so this is Lieutenant Dan that came in here with no legs, and it's been sitting in here with no legs for way too long. But here's what we've been doing. Well, let's take a look at the close. So the links are all in. Link box is good. Front links are in. The front towers, I got those all in and burned in today. I threw a big fat bead across here and it was fine. I just didn't like how it looked. So I ended up doing like a triple pass and grinding it down to a smooth finish. But yeah, the amazing part of all this, and I'm still puzzled as to how this is working out so well. My pitman arm is not hitting the panhard bracket, and the shock tower is, the shock is not hitting the steering, which on mine, I had to put a Heim, it was a nightmare. So I think the main difference on this one is I put these shock towers on a much more laid back angle, which was able to bring these guys vertical instead of, on mine I've got about a 7-degree inward lean. So yeah, fired up on this guy. It's coming together well. The heavy lifting we've done this week has been on this axle. So this guy, Dana 70, Ryan stripped it all down and got everything tacked on, and then we burned this whole thing in this week, got it all painted. We still got to add a breather to this, and obviously the shock towers, and then we're working on where we're going to put the shock towers. We had an idea that didn't work. We had another idea that didn't work. With the main hoops and towers in, it's time to start doing a lot of reinforcing, because the physics of a 4-link system, especially a parallel 4-link like we've got up here, not a triangulated, or some people call this a 3-link, it relies on this panhard bar right there to stabilize the axle from moving side to side. You see in the back, it's triangulated. And so by nature, you cannot move this axle side to side just because it's, you know, it's got opposite and opposing angles. This one does not. That is the reason that you need a panhard bar. So the panhard mounts over to this bracket that is welded onto the frame. You can see it right here. And there's a couple of important things to recognize with the panhard bar. First, there is a tremendous amount of force coming through this bolt. This is half-inch. I believe it's a 1-inch or inch and a half-inch tube. It's so burly because the axle's always trying to drive it this way, and this is the only thing keeping the whole thing from collapsing. So I've had some experience breaking these before, and this is what my solution generally is. This is a tube I just cut and notched that's gonna go right. Oh, let me get it in there for you. It's hard to do with one hand, but I still got to clean up. But there we go. We've got a tube that is going to be going right here. I still got a little clean up to fix that fit up, but you get the idea that this is going to transfer load up to these towers across this center beam and just basically tie everything in together. Now, I had one of these on my truck and I still broke it. I added a massive junction box around the top, which is where it sheared off. And we'll see. We'll see how this one comes out, but it definitely needs some reinforcement. I'm just particularly stoked that now I have a straight shot for the steering shaft. This is the engine bay of the K30 Blazer, and it's pretty packed in here, but you're going to be able to see some of the differences in how I mounted things and some of the challenges I had that aren't showing up with Brian's. One of the main differences is I really ran these shocks inboard. I wanted to have, and you can kind of see it right there, I really wanted to have a steeper angle. I wanted the shocks to be like a 7-degree inward bend, and so they don't come up underneath the hoops, they actually come up on the inside of them, which gave me challenges when, let's get you a light down in here. You guys see my steering linkage back there, how it has to go around my coilover, and it is rather close. Well, that's a result of having the shock up inside instead of directly underneath that guy. This right here is the steering junction. This is where the panhard bracket mount goes from the panhard mount up to the tower. And I actually had, let me put my light down here for a second. I actually had it separate. I broke this tube, and that was out at Sand Hollow this year, and so my whole steering was really bad. But it works. This works for me, but I'm glad to have made some improvements in the fit because it went together a lot smoother on Brian's, and I'm really happy with just some of the minor changes I've made from when I installed my 4-link kit. This next one's going in a lot faster, and I'm sure they're just going to get faster and faster. It's a great designed kit, though. I am stoked to have it in the truck. It just makes this thing handle super rad. So Brian has a Dana 60 up front and a Dana 70 in the rear. Actually, if you turn around, Ryan, check it out. Same axle in double down. Dana 60 up front, Dana 70 dually in the rear. Now, what Brian did that was rather unique is he kept the Dana 70 in the rear. He didn't shorten it. He just swapped to these military beadlocks, which have very little offset. So the axle is really wide, but the wheels allow the tire to move back under the truck. So you get a very wide track. And then if you keep the dual rear wheel hubs, which everyone pulls off the dual rear wheel to put on a single rear wheel hub when they get a Dana 60 off a dually. Brian left it and put on these weigh about 700 pounds a piece, and they are bias ply, so these are pretty much only good for driving over massive rocks and IEDs and other things you might encounter. They're not lightweight. They're not going to be, a race tire. But they work, and they're bomb-proof. So Brian went ahead and stuck with the military beadlocks, front and rear. And then we modified the truss that came with this kit to fit on here. And it came out really well. This is an Arctech truss that you can get that comes with the ORD kit. You get the link mounts on the outside of the axle, you get the link mounts on the top of the axle, and then the truss. You weld it all up together. There's not too many places where the link mounts can go. They pretty much kind of find their home. And then you've got another link bracket up front that mounts to the frame, and it kind of keys into where it wants to go too. All this has been a work in progress. The angles are all set. Ryan and I have been banging this out, getting drive light angles set, getting link length set, making sure our wheelbase is good, making sure all of these are greased, are packed, are set tightly, all set screws are finished. And yeah, we've done a lot of heavy lifting on this thing, and the next step's basically going to be burning in these hoops and getting the rear shocks in. Unlike with a leaf sprung vehicle where the shocks really aren't carrying any load, it's carried on the leaf springs, everything rides on the shocks, which correspondingly means everything rides on these hoops. And these hoops are going to be trying to collapse in on each other. So it's of the utmost importance that you run a cross member. Now, this is where it got challenging for me. As I have an LS, I don't have a throttle body, or I don't have a carburetor, I don't have a distributor. I have an entire intake manifold that runs front to back. My throttle body is up here, my alternator's up here, and as a result, I had to run these bars, these shock hoops, a lot more vertically so I could clear the entire engine. With Brian's, I was able to just go right across the front. So we're able to angle out these shock tubes, these hoops, quite a bit. The panhard bracket right here has enough room to clear the pitman arm. This is another area where things get a little dicey because you got so much stuff coming together right here. You want to make sure that your pitman arm has a full swing so that it's not getting bound up on the panhard bracket. And yeah, Brian's got that full swing, and the way we then verify that it's in the right place is we need to take a look at this panhard bar, make sure it's got a straight shot all the way across, and then when we get our steering in, we're gonna make sure that the steering angle and the panhard angle are identical. If you have them off, if they don't match each other in their angle, you're gonna get bump steer, where as the suspension compresses or extends, the panhard bar is gonna interfere with the steering, and you're gonna end up with a truck that's gonna move one way or the other. Not good. That's not what you want. The challenge often lies in getting this panhard bar to clear the diff under full compression. And that right there is probably the biggest challenge that you face with these trucks, is how to get everything to play nicely. Not only at ride height, but at full extension and full compression, at full droop, at articulation, when the tires are all the way rotate. There's a lot of moving pieces in here that you gotta test. So I always encourage those of you who have square bodies to cut a hole in your floor, because your fuel pump sits right on top of your fuel sender, which sits right on top of your gas tank, which goes right here. Now, you don't need to cut a hole this big. It's been very useful for us while we've been doing all this axle work, but this is a little too much. Brian has a massive fuel cell, like a 44-gallon fuel cell. Why he'd ever want to do 44 gallons, let's say he gets 10 miles a gallon, that would be 400 miles in this guy in one shot. So he doesn't need a fuel tank this big. Regardless, he's got one. That's what we're stuck with. He also had some shock towers that came up through the floor right here, and this has been our biggest headache so far. Sometimes you want to try and save time, and we thought it'd be really cool if we could repurpose some of the shock hoops that he had in here before. You'll actually see we've got them inverted underneath to help support it right now. But the shock towers came up through the floor, and we were cautiously optimistic that we could run the shocks through the same hole in the floor. Unfortunately, you got to remember that the shocks themselves, when they've got the spring on them, they're about 4 inches wide, and there is movement. So you got to have a pretty decent passageway through the floor, and this hole is just kind of in the wrong place. So our next step is redoing the shock hoops. We're not going to go off a single point. We're going to do a arch that runs through the floor, and then the shock down through here, and then we're going to mount it onto the frame down here. I blew up my bender last week trying to make some tube bends, and so that's kind of on hold right now. But yeah, we still have plenty to do. We got to get his fuel tank back in here. We got to start welding up some brackets for the frame where the shock hoops are going to mount. But apart from that, the thing's coming together. Oh, and then we're going to start working on the Magnum box. This is the Magnum box shift. Actually, this is the 205 shifter. So you're going to have your front drive or rear drive shaft, front drive shaft. And then this guy is going to be for the Magnum box. So all these linkages have to get designed and built. We're gonna have to cut up his floor and do that, but progress is being made. It may look like a hot mess, but it is less and less of a mess as each day proceeds. So I'm really stoked on how this thing is coming. I'm looking forward to doing some wheeling trips with Brian next year in this thing and watching him just demolish stuff. This thing's gonna be rad. I hope you guys enjoyed this behind the scenes on what we've been doing on Lieutenant Dan. If you want to see more in detail videos on a 4-link, I have a huge video series of when I 4-linked the K30 Blazer behind me. I'll link that up here in the corner and down below in the show notes. Make sure to check it out. Leave a comment. What's the next project you're working on your build? Do you have something to do over the holidays? Let us know down below and let's talk about it. Merricks Garage.